Help sick and injured children by donating to my Extra Life campaign. Link in the description and pinned comment. All proceeds go to Children's Wisconsin. If we reach $1,000, I'll make my Discord server public.
I believe there's a dragon inside each and every one of us.
When Nintendo first got into the mobile market, I and, let's be honest, a lot of people were skeptical. And for good reason. Only 2 of Nintendo's mobile titles were of any real significance to me for any notable length of time. The first was Fire Emblem Heroes, and the other was Dragalia Lost. Teaming up with Cygames to create Nintendo's first mobile original IP ended up giving me something more special than I ever thought possible for a device that's normally used to talk to my dad every few weeks or so. It started out with a few growing pains, but once it hit its stride, it took off running. It had a great story, an enjoyable cast of characters, challenging and fun gameplay, and even though it was a gacha game, which I normally turn up my nose at, it was incredibly generous for such a game. But, as to be expected for any live service game, the end must come, and with the game's main campaign coming to a close and the specter of the end of service looming large, I wanted to pay tribute to the game before it becomes lost forever. And since the roster is so large that narrowing it down to 10 would be monumental, I decided to cover the side events. Aside from being a part of the game's generosity, they offered some unique stories, some of which tied into the main campaign, and introduced us to many side characters who would end up on at least a few teams. Now I'm picking from raids, facility, and invasion events because the defense and onslaught events really didn't do it for me, and I'm saving the crossovers for a quick list elsewhere. There's also the possibility of a couple of double bills on this one, and though it goes without saying, there are massive spoilers on here, so you've been warned. So come along with me, fellow Losties, and don't forget your dragon partners! It's game time!
Pop quiz! What do you get when you take a buddy cop flick and add a dash of eldritch horror? You get the Accursed Archives.
Horror and humor make strange bedfellows, and this event was a good example of this. The first half of the duo in question is the Inquisitor Kuran, a guy who would rather seek the truth than simply punish heretics, and has a tendency to mangle slang worse than Omi from Shaolin Showdown. His most unusual partner is Heinwald, a researcher of the arcane who you just know is hiding a few somethings. The reason they came to the general vicinity of the Halidom was to investigate the disappearance of an entire village. Well, save for one little girl named Lathna who's acting pretty sus. Is it trauma or something worse? Well, in any case, this dysfunctional duo is hoping to unseal a forbidden library in order to possibly find the truth behind the incident. And of course, being the stand-up guy that he is, Yuden decides to join the investigation. Keep in mind, even while riding the trauma train, this guy can't help but help those in need. The really creepy stuff happens in the library. People turned into books? Freaking Nyarlathotep? Sweet sassy molassy, this place gives me the goddamn creeps! This was an event that featured a healthy helping of Lovecraftian horror with a side of mystery and a dash of humor for flavor. The dynamic between Kuran and Heinwald is definitely entertaining, and both of these adventurers have seen use to some extent even though power creep would eventually claim them both. Main problem is that being a facility event, the actual fights were generic monsters. The raids and invasions were where the cool fights were.
We're going straight from Lovecraftian horror to shadowy organizations. Strap in, people.
Scars of the Syndicate was announced at the 1.5-year Dragalia Digest, and I knew we were in for a ride just from Mad Kid's contribution with the theme alone. But the story itself continued the game's trend of side events not being afraid to be dark. The story kicks off with Yuden and company responding to an attack by fiends on a nearby village, only to be confronted by the edgiest motherfucker this side of Grestea. The dude's name is Aldred, who was made an outlaw as part of the Syndicate's desire to create synthetic shapeshifters. Basically, these guys are like the Shocker organization from Kamen Rider. Secret society who's big into human experimentation, the pieces line up. And they discarded Aldred as a failure, as well as his dragon friend Andromeda, and he is pissed. Pissed enough to throw hands with anyone who can shapeshift, even our precious prince. Turns out the one responsible for turning Aldred into the edgelord he became is this really creepy dude known only as the Doctor. And he has absolutely dreadful designs in mind for the prince. He wants to unleash a terrifying immortal fiend upon the world for the sake of ultimate knowledge. Now this could be a me thing, but I don't think that preserving all the world's knowledge is worth endangering that very world! This whole ordeal makes for a gripping story of revenge and redemption, with some really sinister moments that show just how terrifying an organization the Syndicate actually is. There's also some great contrast between Aldred's anger and desire for vengeance, and Mutan's courage and idealism. Not to mention the contrast between Aldred and Andromeda. Meanwhile, Aspidocalone proved to be a decent raid boss once you get past the fact that it's basically a lowland Fraganoth. Plus, Get Up by Mad Kid is such a banger. This event had a follow-up sometime later with Shackles of the Syndicate, but unfortunately with EOS on the horizon, this arc won't get a proper conclusion. I wanted my Kamen Rider alt, damn it! Okay, we've had 2 dark events in a row on this list so far, so how about we lighten the mood for a bit? Quite literally, in fact. A splash of adventure and a crescendo of courage served as the game's first summer double feature, and it gives us a much appreciated change of pace from the main campaign. Yeah, things got pretty heavy even back then. So it starts as a treasure hunt on a tropical island, accelerates into intrigue involving a long-standing conflict between a dragon who helped guide an adventurer and a vicious pirate fiend over said adventurer's greatest treasure. But the real star of the show here is Siren. What, as in those vicious sea bitches who lured sailors to their doom with their songs? Yeah, same namesake, except this Siren is a dragon, and the mythos behind her namesake turns out to be just rumors. In fact, she actually helped save the day by helping the party give Barbary the raid boss beatdown she deserves. Perhaps her design in battle, by the way. The second half of the double bill puts Siren in the spotlight again as the party works together to help her put on a concert that no one will forget. Along the way, Siren's courage helps Cleo overcome some of the regrets of her past, which is honestly very touching. The whole scene is just really endearing, and definitely a welcome change of tone, especially when compared to the previous 2 events on this list. While not without its serious moments, it's also very heartwarming, particularly Siren's desire to share her beautiful song with the world. In fact, Nintendo topped the whole thing off with a full CGI performance video on their mobile channel. Our girl's a bona fide idol now, isn't that sweet? Not to mention, the summer alts we got looked great, and some of those alts really got some good use, particularly after the introduction of mana spirals. I just wish we could have gotten a playable summer Elisanne. That outfit looked so pretty.
Never forget what they took from you.
Okay, now that we've got the more lighthearted stuff out of the way, I hope you're strapped in, because from here on out, we're about to get serious.
Neil, hit the serious button!
Advent of the Origin, the final new event released for the game, definitely had the highest stakes of any event throughout the entire game. It also ties into several plot threads which were brought into play both in the main story and in past events. The fate of Auriga, the Auspex of the Northern Church who was introduced as an antagonistic figure early into the Fairy Kingdom arc, but would eventually become a major player in the finale with the party's quest to defeat the Progenitor. Yuden's bond with his sister Zethia, that being Yuden's initial motivation for his entire quest in the first place. And most importantly of all, at the center of the event, tying into the basis of the very creation of the game's world, and the eternal conflict between the Origin, Bahamut, and the Progenitor, Xenos. A desire to defeat the latter being the primary motivator for Nedric's actions during the Fairy Kingdom arc. The main conflict, however, comes from the resurrection of the former via the body of the Demon Lord which was dealt with in a previous event. As it turns out, the Bahamut with which Zethia and Nedric split a pact was not the real deal. The actual Origin is a lot more powerful and a lot more extreme. It's so bent on bringing down the Progenitor that it's willing to erase whatever world he's in completely, along with every single being in that world. And as anime cliches would have it, the only thing that can stand up to such power is the invincible power of Kizuna! As played out as this trope is, it's able to get us amazing new forms for both Yuden and Zethia, which are both incredibly powerful and look dope as hell. Not to mention the fight against True Bahamut was incredibly intense on the Omega difficulties, which at this point are really the only ones that matter. Ultimately, this was a powerful exclamation point on the event quests, as well as a great setup for the final 2 chapters of the main campaign. You can look on from the ethereal plane, Bahamut. Leave the rest to us. One of the main struggles throughout the main campaign was among Prince Euden's siblings, descendants of the founder King Alberius. As the story opened up, most of them would be at our hero's throat. However, circumstances and necessity would eventually force nearly all of them together against a common foe. And January of 2022 would bring us the ultimate family reunion in the only invasion event on this list, the Blood That Binds. When fiends powered by the Progenitor's black mana begin a coordinated attack on the cities of the continent, leave it to the born leader Leonidas to rally the troops, and reveal that the siblings themselves are being targeted. And leading the fiends is the absolutely last person anyone would have expected, Alberius himself. Or rather, a replica of Alberius created by Ferris while the latter was under the possession of the Progenitor. As one would imagine, dealing with one of his stature, things quickly go farther south in the collapsing ice shelves of Antarctica. The only way victory can be achieved is for the Scions of Alberia to unite and to chart their own path forward instead of clinging to the old legends. And that's what makes this story so cool. It's a story of unity and putting aside old differences for the sake of a common goal, as well as a story of not trying to be something you're not. 2 stars in particular shine the brightest here. The first being Ferris, who spent most of the game as the Progenitor's vessel and only recently regained himself. The other, and more significant, is Valix, a prideful soldier who idolized Alberius. It was only when faced with his replica that he realized that following a deceased idol would only hold him back. And the icing on this cake is the fight against the replica of Alberius himself. Players of the game know how powerful Alberius is, he's a legend for a reason after all, and his replica is equally as effective as a boss fight. The trials were definitely intense. And one thing I haven't mentioned nearly enough is the themes that have come with these events. We've gotten banger after banger with these events, and It's All Fiction is no exception. I swear, this could have been one hell of an anime opening. Oh, and while we're on the subject of Alberius and his history...
Fuck Elysium. All my homies hate Elysium.
In order to prepare for the launch of Dragalia Lost, there were a few videos worth of world building. One of those videos was about the previously mentioned Alberius, about how he fought against the evil Diurnal Empire, sealed the archfiend Mor Sayadi, made pacts with the Great Worms, and founded the Kingdom of Alberia. Of course, with legends like that, there was always more to them than what the history books tell us. Dawn of Dragalia was shown for the 2.5-year anniversary, and proved to be quite an insightful look into the man behind the legend. Before he became a king, Alberius was simply a man, who traveled the lands with his companion, the very same Midgard-stormer who would spark our own hero's quest, though his humanoid form is admittedly as handsome as Alberius himself. Surprisingly, the main focus isn't Alberius' battle to seal Mor Sayadi, but the events leading up to it. How he met Miriam, the woman who fell in love with him and whose image would be the basis for Mim, how he would become a leader in the battle with Diurnal's forces, how he would be betrayed by one of the very people he was protecting, and most importantly, just how much of a complete asshole Elysium is. Honestly, for a dragon who is supposed to be revered by the people, Elysium is every bit as egotistical as the other is hateful. The whole ordeal gives us some much-needed context to the old legend and does a great job of characterizing Alberius, and also shows the kind of dragon Midgard-stormer was, not to mention Thonius was pretty badass as well. Plus, players got the satisfaction of kicking Elysium's ass over and over. It was a pretty tough fight on Omega Level 3, especially when he called in his dragon minions. On top of that, the related summon showcase let us pull for the legend himself, and he was awesome! Plus, human Midgard-stormer was arguably the best free unit in the entire game. When an event with such significance barely reaches the top 5, you know the bar is high. It's a great story which adds a lot to the game's lore, fleshes out the story of one of the game's key figures, as well as some ominous foreshadowing in the end. While it would have been cool to see the actual battle with Mor Sayadi, this is more than sufficient as a substitute. Also, I took every opportunity to keep beating down Elysium after his health bar depleted. Not because he had a second form, but because I fucking could.
Just because it's summer, doesn't mean the nights don't get dark.
Man, even on summer vacation, Euden and his posse just can't catch a break, can they? Doomsday Getaway was the second event of the summer of 2020, and very much unlike the summer double bill that was earlier in the list, this is no day at the beach. Which is quite a contrast considering the previous event was about protecting the beach from the Empire. The event story starts out as the prince and his friends deal with Scylla, a monstrous fiend with a bit of a resemblance to Barbary and a penchant for stealing souls. After taking down the monster, the gang decides to take a much needed vacation. But hey, this is Dragalia Lost. We can't exactly have nice things now, can we? Sure enough, one of our motley crew ends up mysteriously dying. And before the corpse is even cold, a malevolent critter named Carmen shows up and declares that the Mare der Air is one of them and they're all part of a killing game. Well, it seems that one of the writers at Side Games was a fan of both Danganronpa and Among Us and decided to combine the two. We even got the Monokuma XP and everything. Only thing missing is the trials. One of the chapters is even called The Evil Among Us. So night after night, people keep dying and people keep acting sus. But the truth behind this game is a lot more weird than I was expecting. Honestly, it was like something out of one of those Scooby-Doo movies, only where the monsters are real. Heck, the event's theme, Stealth Dance, even gives off those Danganronpa vibes. And I don't even play Danganronpa. As for Scylla, the raid boss, well, she was downright nasty. The fact that she could trap one of your party members inside a freaking doll meant that you had to plan your team a bit differently than any other raid battle, because you were essentially working with 3 team members instead of 4. This was definitely an entertaining event, if mainly in a morbid sense. You never knew who was gonna fall next, and the mystery at least kept me invested. Though one thing I will admit is that I found the summer alts that year to be kind of underwhelming, compared to what we got the year before and the year after at least. But hey, at least we got something that provided excitement both in story and in battle. Now maybe once this whole mess is over, perhaps Yuden and his comrades can take a real vacation for once. Oh, who am I kidding, Yuden is a magnet for trouble. Just a heads up, these last 3 were tough to order, because the anniversary events went in hard. Now that we've established that, we're gonna pull back the curtain on one of the biggest aspects of the game's lore, courtesy of the 2nd anniversary event, Forgotten Truths. One of the biggest events surrounding the lore of Dragalia Lost's history is the First War of Sealing, in which the goddess Ilia brought humans and dragons together with the aid of the Holy Worm Elysium and sealed away the demon Mor Sayadi. Of course, like many legends that are part of the lore of video games, there's a lot more to the old stories than what the powers that be want us to know. And our poor Zethia, who spent a good third or more of the main campaign possessed by the other, got to learn that the hard way when she got thrown back in time. As it turns out, Ilia was actually an alchemist who was researching ways to create portals to other worlds while living with her adopted mother, a fairy named Mini. Even managed to create a whole-ass homunculus whom she named Mordecai. Unfortunately, her work was sought after by the very ancient civilization whose greed threatened the mana of the world, which led them to chase her relentlessly. Those jerks even had a whole army of combat androids at their command. Meanwhile, the dragons of the time were rightfully pissed off. How do you think a lot of us feel about climate change? And Elysium, well, this was where players found out just how high and mighty and outright controlling Elysium was in the first place. It's to the point that I don't even know whether or not I should have seen it coming when Elysium turned out to be directly responsible for the creation of Mor Sayadi to begin with. Honestly, there's so few beings you can even trust in this world. Learning the truth behind this vital piece of the game's lore was just so fascinating, and it gave us some much appreciated background, a good amount of which would come back in the main campaign. Plus, we got the chance to take on the Other himself in the raid battles, and damn was it exciting. Especially with the event's theme, We Are the Lights, playing during the fight. That song could play during any heroic team's last stand. As a bonus, we got summoning showcases featuring Ilia herself, and even Midgardstormer's ancient form, Midgardstormer Zero, who was a staple on my win team ever since I pulled him. Hell, the fight against Mor Sayadi was so exciting they even made it a super boss so that we could fight him at any time. Only to get quickly stomped if you weren't severely overpowered with endgame gear. Hope you were on that grind!
Pro tip. If anyone offers you a chance to change the past, run. Don't respond, just run.
Fractured Futures was the first anniversary event, and for those that thought the Accursed Archives was as dark as it was gonna get, oh man, they had no idea. Yuden was already a regular passenger on the trauma train for several chapters by this point, and this event? Well, this event would give an ordinary person nightmares for the rest of their godforsaken life. And the mastermind behind this terrifying time-traveling trauma is the dragon Kronos, who first appears before Yuden with the visage of a deceptively cute ally who offers Yuden the opportunity to undo the events that haunted him for so long. Zephia's capture, the possession of his father by the other, everything that set Yuden on this whole path to begin with. Along the way, he's confronted by a man named Audric who's desperately trying to prevent some kind of temporal disaster from happening. And when we saw Kronos reveal its true form in killing Zephia's otherworldly counterpart, it was a case of, yeah, I knew something like this was coming. And as it turns out, this event truly introduced the game's multiverse properly. This was an idea that was hinted at as early as the first events, but this is where we saw how terrifying the possibilities were, with questions that would get answers in due time. Who was this true liege that Kronos kept babbling about? Who or what caused this terrifying alternate future to come to pass? Who reduced the Halidom to a smoking pile of rubble? And who in the name of all that is good made our friend not cry like this? This story was heavier than anything we had seen thus far, and proved just how far the events were willing to go, with implications that would carry over into the main campaign. Case in point, Audric would return during the Fairy Kingdom arc, though having slipped the chain of causality, Yuden doesn't remember him even after everything that happened during the event. But another thing that needs to be talked about in this event was the raid battle against Kronos himself. Or rather, battles. I'm pretty sure this was the only event in which the raid boss had multiple forms. Kronos' original form was the standard raid boss, and he was the biggest boss in size by far at that point. But then, in the EX and Nightmare raids, we saw a smaller but deadlier form. Golden Frieza, Kronos Nyx. This form was more dangerous with a wider range of attacks, one of which could cause a total party wipe if it wasn't stopped. And as fate would have it, Kronos Nyx would eventually become a dragon you could pull during a gala. Look at me. Look at me. I'm your liege now. And before we get to number 1, here are some honorable mentions. A Wish to the Winds, The Phantom's Ransom, Flames of Reflection, Toll of the Deep, and Celestial Showdown. As I mentioned before, ranking some of these was really tough, and some events with genuinely good stories ultimately missed the cut. There were even a few story arcs that spanned multiple events. Arguably the best arc was the Northern Ilian Church arc, which centered around the Apostles, their dragons known as the Archangels, and a series of incidents that would bring them into conflict with a group of demons. The second of these events revealed that the leader of these Apostles, Basilius, was actually a traitor who was part of a plot to revive the demon lord Satan. And the climax of this arc would be realized in the 3rd anniversary event, and my pick for number 1, Faith Forsaken. This 2-part spectacle was the culmination of the Apostles' journey, and threw them headlong into a maelstrom which answered questions which arose as early as the beginning of the Fairy Kingdom arc. The event even begins with them being marked as traitors to the Church and gets even more intense from there. From corruption and conspiracy within the Church, to the true intentions and motivations of Auriga, to the revelation that Regina and Auriga were sisters, to the revelation that Harl, or rather who we thought was Harl, was actually a demon named Loki who was manipulating multiple parties throughout the whole campaign for the sake of his goals of reviving Satan. And that was just part 1. Like I said, this was a 2-part event. The Apostles' situation went from bad to worse when Satan revived. And even as Yuden and his companions finally show up, better late than never I guess, the spotlight is clearly on the Apostles as they race against time to save their Archangel partners, learning about the truth behind the ancient war in the process. And undoubtedly the highlight of the story was the climax, in which heroes and dragons from across the game's lifespan banded together to fight against the archdemons in order to weaken Satan, and Harl, the real Harl, giving Loki his just desserts, which allowed our heroes to engage the Demon Lord in the event's final climactic battle. And what a battle! Satan was not messing around, launching a torrent of powerful attacks, and even summoning demons to assist him. In fact, the Nightmare difficulty version of this fight was unique because it was a time attack to deal as much damage as possible. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the theme of this event. Light of Fire is easily in my top 3 event themes throughout the entire life of the game. All cards on the table, Faith Forsaken absolutely nailed everything. It was an amazing climax to the Northern Church arc, the stakes were astronomical, the character dynamics were on point, the battle was great, the theme was incredible, and most of all, the overarching theme that no matter how bleak things get, there's always something worth fighting for.
And as the main campaign of Dragalia Lost reaches its climax, I don't want to be sad because it's ending, but that's destined to be the fate of all mobile games. I I just hope that one day Nintendo and Cygames will find a way to keep this world alive in some way. But let us be thankful for what this game did give us. Now and forever, Vio Rise Alberia. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
Captain's Log, Stardate 8675.309. We have encountered some unusual dimensional distortion in the Arcadia system. Our scout ship is detecting highly abnormal readings. We sent a probe to investigate the rift, but lost contact shortly after. It appears the only way to seal this rift is to play Breakout. The universe is full of mysteries. Next time, QG at the arcade, Arkanoid. It's game time! Hey everyone, QG here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check out my Twitter and my Twitch streams, and consider supporting me through Patreon and donating to my Extra Life campaign to support Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching.